and hello and welcome to the last of our 3 webinars on WAIS 5. This one discussing using WAIS 5 and WMS 5 together to enhance your evaluations. As I'm sure you all know, the WAIS 5 is an individually administered test of cognitive ability for adults and adolescents ages 16 and above. It's the leading adult intellectual ability measure in the world and now has 20 subtests measuring 5 cognitive domains, as well as producing a measure of global intelligence, the full-scale IQ. And the 5th edition of the Wechsler Memory Scale, or WMS 5, is an individually administered battery that allows you to assess various memory and working memory abilities in adolescents and adults. The normative sample for the WMS 5 was co-collected and co-normed with WAIS 5, and we'll see in a few moments why that's so important to their use together. Remember, assessment only provides functioning information at a particular point in time, and this is true for the WMS 5. It's used in various types of evaluations, including clinical, neuropsychological, and rehabilitation, as well as in clinical research. With some conditions, we expect to see improvement over time. For example, as an examinee recovers from a traumatic brain injury or stroke, or decline over time, for example, various dementing conditions. The WMS 5 is most helpful when its scores are interpreted within the context of other information. And today we'll focus on combining findings from the WAIS 5 and WMS 5. Here are the topics we'll cover today. This is a lot, so be prepared for me to share a lot of information in a short time. A recorded version of today's webinar will be available shortly on the Pearson Clinical Assessment website. Let's start with the features and forms of the new WMS revision. Some features will be familiar to you as they were carried over from WMS 4. These include all of the subtests as well as the brief cognitive status exam, along with the standard form. Developmentally appropriate item sets for both younger and older examinees. The ability to conduct a comparative ability memory analysis when also administering the WAIS 5, ACS scores, and the ability to substitute CVLT-3 scores for verbal paired associate scores. In contrast to WMS 4, the upcoming ACS scores will be incorporated into WMS 5, requiring no additional purchase. Also new to the WMS 5 are 3 new forms: a short form, an alternate form, and an immediate memory screener. The standard form still contains all WMS 5 subtests and the optional BCSE, as listed here in the right-hand column. Note that examinees between the ages of 70 and 90 are not administered the immediate or delayed conditions of the design subtest. The standard form will provide you with the most comprehensive assessment of memory, including visual working memory. The new short form is a brief battery that includes only 3 subtests, listed here again on the right, allowing you to sample both immediate and delayed recall for both orally and visually presented information. It's appropriate if characteristics of your client or time constraints don't allow administration of the standard form. The alternate form is a parallel version that contains the WMS-4 versions of logical memory and visual reproduction, and is largely used for follow-up assessments to determine memory improvement or decline. If you're familiar with administration of these WMS-4 subtests, you'll notice there are a few changes. Specifically, one item was dropped from WMS-4 visual reproduction, and the administration procedures for visual reproduction are now the same as for the WMS-5. That is, 2 trials given for immediate recall. And finally, we now have an immediate memory screener, which contains immediate recall subtests only, listed again on the right. It screens for memory weakness and, if it's found, allows the examiner to continue on with a full administration using the standard form. Next, let's look briefly at the test structure of the WMS-5. Here you see listed on the left the test's primary subtest scaled scores. Again, note that older examinees are not administered the design subtest. WMS-5 also has a host of process scores and contrast scaled scores, which we won't say too much about today, but which add to the construct coverage and utility of the test. And here are the 5 primary index scores, along with information on which subtests contribute to each. Once more, I'll point out the difference in component subtests for younger and older examinees. So our 5 primary index scores for WMS-5 are auditory memory, visual working memory, immediate memory, and delayed memory. And here's a list of the WMS-5 ancillary index scores. Note that 4 of them are available only for younger examinees, ages 16 to 69. In addition, the test allows you, or Q Global or Q Interactive, to calculate cumulative percentage index scores, subtest level differences within index scores, subtest discrepancy comparisons, subtest level contrast scaled scores, and index level contrast scaled scores. Of course, there are numerous scores that can be calculated for ability memory analysis, but we'll get to those in a moment. First, let's talk about how examiners benefit when the WAIS-5 and WMS-5 are both included in an evaluation. Populations for which we commonly think to include the WMS-5 in our battery include TBI patients, those who've suffered a stroke, or other neurological conditions that affect the brain. Another population commonly assessed are older adults who are suspected of having age-related memory decline, including mild cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's disease, or other dementing conditions. The test also helps us distinguish between psychiatric and neurological disorders. Other situations where I find the WMS-5 to be a helpful part of my battery include adolescents and adults being evaluated for possible ADHD and/or learning disorders, which may have gone undetected when they were younger or were misidentified as behavioral problems. Obtaining a comprehensive picture of cognitive strengths and weaknesses as struggling high school students are transitioning to their next challenge, which might be college, vocational training, or moving into the world of work. And for those planning to attend college or who are already there and struggling, to assist with determining the causes of their difficulties and assist them with qualifying for post-secondary accommodations. We know from previous research that administration of a full WAIS followed by a full WMS negatively impacts WMS scores, while the opposite order of administration did not show the same effects for WAIS scores. So if you're administering both tests in one day, we recommend that you either administer the WMS-5 first or provide at least a 1-hour break between the two tests. Personally, I wouldn't recommend administering both tests on the same day. It's tiring for both examiner and examinee, particularly some of the types of examinees who are likely to be taking this test, who are suspected or known to have a brain disorder or brain dysfunction of some type. But there are times when you have to do this, both tests on the same day. For example, when a client has traveled in from a distance and can only provide you with 1 day for assessment. You may be wondering, with 2 subtests included in both WAIS-5 and WMS-5, when should I administer them? It's entirely up to you to determine whether you prefer to administer spatial addition and symbol span as part of the WAIS-5 or the WMS-5, but not recommended that you administer them twice. Note also that there's another factor you'll want to consider. If you administer and score using pencil and paper, things are pretty straightforward, but can become a bit more complicated with digital administration. In this case, the examiner will get more index scores when these subtests are administered with WAIS-5 than with WMS-5. So let's move to considering how best to compare performance on WAIS-5 and WMS-5. That is, to compare cognitive ability and memory when both tests are administered. As I mentioned earlier, the co-norming of WAIS-5 and WMS-5 allows us to directly compare composite scores from the 2 tests. This can be done using analysis of index score discrepancies or via contrast scores. More about that in a moment. For example, as an examiner, you may wish to compare the scores from a client's WAIS-5 working memory index and WMS-5 visual working memory index. WAIS-5 and WMS-5 together provide you with the ability to do an ability memory analysis, which tests specific hypotheses and assists with differential diagnosis. High-level hypotheses may include whether general ability and memory skills are consistent or whether there are impairments in specific memory functions. Answering questions like these requires interpreting memory scores within the context of a client's level of general intellectual functioning. For example, a WMS-5 index score of 105 may appear average, but likely means something very different if the client's GAI score from the WAIS is 89 or is 120. If you review Chapter 6 of the WMS-5 Technical and Interpretive Manual and the appropriate page in the WMS-5 record form, you'll see a list and explanation of all the available comparisons. However, keep in mind that we all learned in statistics class that as the number of multiple comparisons increases, the likelihood of false positives increases along with it. So try to be selective in determining which comparisons you analyze. This can be hard to do when Q Global or Q Interactive provides you with all the comparison scores. But think carefully about your client's functioning and referral questions and try to select only the most appropriate comparisons to analyze. WAIS 5 and WMS 5 together provide you with the ability to do an ability memory analysis using one of three methods: the simple difference method, the predicted difference method, and contrast scaled scores. I won't go into statistical detail about how they're calculated, but again, refer you to Chapter 6 and the record form. What comparisons are available? First off, you can compare an examinee's WAIS 5 GAI with any or all of the WMS 5 primary index scores. That is, with auditory memory, visual memory index, visual working memory index, the immediate memory index, and/or the delayed memory index. You may be wondering why we use the GAI rather than the full-scale IQ for these comparisons. As you know, the GAI provides a composite score that eliminates the effects of working memory and processing speed, which together account for about 30% of the variance in full-scale IQ scores. Working memory and processing speed deficits often drag down a full-scale score, making it difficult to get an accurate comparison between cognitive ability and memory functions. So using the GAI makes it easier to detect such differences if they're there, especially when the full-scale IQ score is relatively low. Here are the remaining comparisons between scores on the two tests. These are ones that don't involve the WAIS 5 GAI. Take a look, test yourself, and see if you can pinpoint what comparison and what information each of these will provide you with. While there are pros and cons to each of the three methods for making WAIS 5, WMS 5 comparisons, I'd urge you to become familiar with the contrast scaled scores method. It's not as immediately intuitive as the two difference methods, which look a lot like the typical ways we use to compare ability and achievement scores, but statistically, contrast scores have a lot going for them. Contrast scaled scores are comparable to any other scaled scores on WMS 5. That is, they have a mean of 10 and a standard deviation of 3, but they're special and very powerful. A contrast scaled score describes an examinee's relative memory ability as measured by a WMS 5 primary index score, controlling for their cognitive ability as measured by a WAIS 5 composite score. So they answer questions like, is this WMS 5 auditory memory score unexpectedly low given the client's WAIS 5 verbal comprehension score? Finally, in terms of interpreting WMS 5 scores in context, it's helpful to obtain additional contextual clues. One way to do this is to include other types of measures in your evaluation, guided by your client's history, referral questions, and relevant medical, educational, and psychosocial factors. A few words regarding administration and scoring options for the WMS 5, since a significant percentage of our customers decide to make the move to Q Interactive when faced with the expense of a new major test. For administration, you can use the traditional paper kit or use Q Interactive to administer digitally using 2 iPads. In addition, there are scoring options. If you administered WAIS 5 and WMS 5 using the traditional paper kits, you can either score by hand or opt for digital scoring using Pearson's online Q Global system. If you're administering using Q Interactive, digital scoring is included in the QI system. Digital scoring, whether from Q Global or Q Interactive, is a great time saver and provides quality control by eliminating the myriad table lookups that can lead to scoring errors. Let me also mention that there is a WMS 5 kit available with 1 year of Q Global scoring and reporting available, and it's the same price as the kit without Q Global. So you get 1 year of free digital scoring at no charge, including a host of scores for the standard form that are only available in the digital report. If you heard my dog, raise your hand. I hear him all the time. Just a little more information for you here. The ACS is now planned for publication primarily in 2026 and will further help you with score comparisons. It will include a measure of premorbid functioning, the ability to measure performance validity, and demographic adjustments for norms. You're probably also wondering when the WMS 5 itself will publish. The paper kit and the Q Global scoring are scheduled for August, and the Q Interactive version will be available in September. Next, save the date for a 1-hour webinar presented by WMS 5 Research Director, Dr. Jennifer Puig. She'll cover what's new with the 5th edition, including a thorough review of the new scores and different administration options. You can register at pearsonassessments.com, where you can also access additional product information and frequently asked questions. And more great news. There's currently a 10% discount on WMS 5 kits, and you don't need a promo code to qualify for it. Just order, and we'll take care of adding your discount. Great, we have a few minutes left to address a couple of the questions that may have come in. If I don't get to your question now, please go to the URL shown here to locate the assessment consultant for your state and type of practice and contact them for the information you need. Thank you so much for your time today. I wish you all happy testing, and now I'll throw things back to Deb.
Thank you, Dr. Roden. Good information from an overview standpoint, and we behind the scenes have done a pretty good job of keeping up with the questions in the chat here. So I think we may have time for just a couple. I want to reiterate, because the question that we've been getting most is, when is the WMS going to be available? And you did mention it, but I'm just going to reiterate. Paper kits and Q Global scoring will be available in August. And then the full digital option on Q Interactive is available in September. And as you mentioned, a lot of folks have questions about ACS. So I'm just going to articulate that here again, because that was a very frequently asked question. Demographically adjusted norms and the test of premorbid functioning will be available in early 2026. And then we'll be following with word choice, which will be helpful in the assessment of effort in later 2026. So let's see, anything new come in that we can ask you? A lot of development questions around WMS with WISC, which I don't believe is appropriate given the age range here. So I'm going to skip that one. And I already, let's see. some more questions about Q Global here. Using digital scoring for paper, will I be able to use the same software or do I need new? You would need, if you're already using the WMS 4 software, you would need new WMS 5 scoring when the WMS 5 comes out. That software doesn't automatically upgrade. So, I think you escaped pretty easily, Dr. Roden. We had mostly
yes, thank you for answering those.
And platform delivery. So I want to just take the opportunity then to give people like 2 minutes back in their schedule. And I want to thank you for what I perceive as a very helpful overview of the upcoming WMS 5. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. And as mentioned, if you have a last minute question that did not get answered and you would like somebody to answer it, there is a form that will pop up at the end of the webinar. Please enter it there. With that, everybody have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.